Hi, my name is Claudia Miles, and my persuasive speech is over euthanasia. Euthanasia is such a controversial topic because it is used in only the extremes. It's not used anywhere in between, so people only see the completely positive sides or the completely negative sides of using euthanasia. Euthanasia is also known as assisted suicide because doctors have to prescribe it for people to use it. And because it's not legal, people can't do that. It's only legal in a few states and then other foreign countries like Australia and Switzerland and Great Britain. And then also in the United States, it's legal in Oregon, so people can go there. It's also legal in Canada, but there are very specific rules on how you can use it. In Oregon, euthanasia is known as death with dignity, and the doctor prescribes the medicine and gives the patient the option of using it, but they don't have to take it. It would be completely up to the patient to take the euthanasia. It's also known as secobarbital in Oregon. And an example of a person that did go to Oregon and use it is Brittany Maynard and her husband. They found out that she had a terminal illness and that it was causing her seizures and major headaches, and she was sick every day. And so they moved to Oregon so that she had that option, and she got the medicine, and then she waited until her very last day that she couldn't tolerate having seizures every few hours, sometimes even several times an hour, and she was nauseous all the time. So her last day that she lived, she went on a hike, and then she took her secobarbital euthanasia at home with her family all around her. She died with her family there, and it was completely up to her. The doctors had no involvement in it except that they gave her the medicine. And this should be an option because there are people out there that live with terminal illnesses that can't take care of themselves, that are miserable living, and that's not a good way to exist. People should be able to live and have a purpose in life and not have to be surviving off of other people because they can't take care of themselves anymore. They should have the option if they want to. A man that did try to take his life through a very unorthodox version of euthanasia was in an article, and he took enough medicine to kill a horse, and when he died he wrote a note that said "do not resuscitate." But when his wife found him, she called 911 and they brought him back to life anyway. And after he woke up, he was grateful that they brought him back to life. But after he wrote the note, "do not resuscitate," and they brought him back anyway, he felt like he wasn't given the option to die like he wanted to. He wanted to die peacefully in his own way, and he got that taken away from him because the doctors decided they needed to bring him back, that he needed to live again even though he couldn't take care of himself. Euthanasia majorly is only used in extremes. It's used in cases where there's natural disasters or somebody is so close to dying that they are put to sleep permanently, but they're not actually dead. They're just in a permanent coma. An example of a natural disaster would be Memorial Medical Hospital in 2007, I think, when they had Hurricane Katrina, and the hospital had to transport patients out, but some of the patients were so weak and so sick that they couldn't be transported out, and so the nurses and doctors stayed with those patients that couldn't be transported for as long as they could until it wasn't safe for them anymore to stay in the hospital because of the lack of food, supplies, electrical outages, power lines down, so there was electric waves going everywhere. And then because they no longer could wait on transportation to come and get the patients that were too weak to be transported earlier, they euthanized the patients and then were later taken to court because it was illegal and they didn't have the grounds or rights to put those people to sleep. And on the nurses and doctors' case, it was a very controversial topic because they had no choice. They could no longer stay with those patients, so it was either leave them there alive, so they starve to death, or put them to sleep because they can't take care of themselves and there's no way to get them out of there. And it's a very fine line to walk on whether or not that was right or not. Another example of euthanasia or assisted suicide would be 9/11. The people that jumped out the windows instead of staying in the building and getting burned to death or killed in the implosion when the buildings imploded. Instead, the people jumped out the windows to escape. And so that would be suicide. And then to make that assisted suicide, you would say, okay, so there was a person in a wheelchair in the room where they were jumping out the window, and that person in a wheelchair asked you to help them jump. That's assisted suicide, and that's a lot like euthanasia, because a lot of patients have asked for doctors to help them die in peace and die in the way they want to, and they've been denied that because it's against the Hippocrates Oath that says the doctors should do good and not cause patients pain, and every patient deserves to live. And so that prevents doctors from being able to use euthanasia. Another reason why doctors don't use euthanasia is because of its abuse. Euthanasia used to be illegal until it was discovered that hospitals were getting paid to use euthanasia on patients where the parents no longer wanted their parents to be alive. Like, the parents' children no wanted their parents to be alive because they wanted the parents' money, so they paid the hospital to euthanize their sick parents. And when the government found this out, they made it illegal to use euthanasia because of the corruption in the hospitals and how it was being abused, and at the time they didn't have a way to keep track of who deserved to have euthanasia and who didn't, and the guidelines on whether or not a patient is still thinking clear enough to want to use euthanasia or not were so blurry. So now a lot of foreign countries have made it legal, but there's very strict guidelines. The person has to be able to decide for themselves. They have to prove that they can think for themselves and make decisions on their own. They have to take it themselves, and no doctors can be present in most of the countries. The patient has to completely take the medicine by themselves. And in those countries, that's how it's legal. And I think that is a very, very good idea, to let a patient decide when a terminal patient that's gonna die in a couple of hours, a couple of days, to be able to die in peace instead of having to die in pain and agony, knowing that they're gonna die, but not knowing when. So euthanasia should be inspected and kept under watch, but it shouldn't be illegal for people that are going to die, that are going to die in pain and hurt and just prolong their life even though they can't do anything for themselves. If they want the option, they should be able to have it. It would just make so many people's lives so much more enjoyable, and then so many more people would be able to die in the way they want to and not in the way doctors want to. They won't have to worry about being put in a coma for years instead of just dying peacefully the way they want to. In some hospitals, euthanasia had been used. It was called LCP, the Liver Care Pool Pathway Program, and patients were being put in a coma, but then they were just left in a coma. They weren't getting any food, they weren't getting any nutrients, so they were just withering away and dying of dehydration and starvation because they weren't being cared for, or they were in a coma. And that's another one of the forms of abused euthanasia, and that's why it needs to be not prohibited but controlled and looked after by many different groups and not just one group of people. And people should have the option to die in peace and not have to die in pain and agony from brain tumors or cancer or heart disease or kidney failure. There's so many different ways people die in pain that don't want to, that could have had the option themselves to die the way they want to. And this is being prevented by doctors not wanting to break the Hippocrates Oath. And in the future, hopefully people will be able to die the way they want to. Thank you for your time.